Okay, thanks very much. Hello, my name is Matt Wood. I'm from Open Lab at Newcastle University, and I'm presenting this research on behalf of my co-authors, Gavin Wood and Madeline Balaam. And yes, I'm here today to talk to you about virtual reality pornography. And it probably goes without saying that there are a few adult themes in this presentation, so this is your formal warning before we proceed. But if you're all up for it, then let's strap in. So pornography is a key aspect in the way we interact with computers. And although it's not often talked about, many argue it's some people's primary use of digital technology. And with the presence of virtual reality, there is an apparently new way of people encountering and experiencing porn. But of course, it's more complicated than this, as although technologies such as the Oculus Rift, HTC Valve, Google Cardboard are new technologies, virtual reality has actually been around since the 1800s, virtual reality porn rather, with this device called the stereoscope, which provided some of the first VR experiences and simultaneously some of the first porn experiences. So in this piece of research, we were interested in viewing virtual reality pornography as a cultural artifact, exploring how people constructed what is or what could be involved with a virtual reality porn experience, and critically explore some of these understandings. So we adopted a method called the story completion task, where participants were asked to complete a story about a character who was about to have a virtual reality porn experience. It was administered online, and participants were recruited mainly through social media sites such as Reddit, and we recruited a number of fan fiction writers within this, but we had no limitations on who could participate, other than you had to be over 18, and we didn't offer any incentives. So a total of 45 participants wrote stories for us, who we never actually met, but those who were interested in engaging with the study completed it online. They were roughly split between male and female, with 3 identifying as a different gender. We had a mostly heterosexual sample, although 15 of our participants identified as non-heterosexual, and our sample mostly comprised of those with no or only some experience of modern virtual reality headsets, with only 2 semi-regular users and 1 regular user. And while participants were told they would be asked to complete a story relating to sex and virtual reality, they were not explicitly told that this was a study about pornography until the story stem was revealed to them. Jack starts up his new virtual reality headset and positions it carefully over his head. He isn't quite sure what to expect. He's about to have his very first virtual reality porn experience. So this is the story stem that was presented to participants through the online survey software, and Jack is the fictitious character who participants were asked to write a story about. And they were asked to spend at least 10 minutes writing their story, which some participants took a little more literally than others. This was our shortest story. And this was our longest story, 1,200 words, descriptions, multiple characters, dialogue. This speaks to the unpredictability of the story completion method, and which some people say is a disadvantage. However, our argument is its unpredictability actually makes it an incredibly exciting method for exploring new areas, and I'll elaborate on that a little bit later. But first, what follows here is our analysis, a thematic analysis of the 2 main themes of meaning-making which were identified in the stories. So we suggest that there were 2 countering narratives of a perfect yet simultaneously precarious experience. And throughout this analysis, we were also interested in the lines that participants drew between what was seen as a real reality and a virtual reality, and how this barrier was negotiated. So one of the most notable features from the stories was how participants scoped this experience as something euphoric, beautiful, intense, and perfect. Often this began with palpable anticipation for Jack. He curls his hands into fists, unwraps them, and drags them down the sides of his thighs to dry the sweat beginning to soften his fingertips. The headset is blank, silent. It was common for these stories to build up gradually, and as suggested here, some highlighted the sensory deprivation of the headset. With his vision and hearing deadened by the headset, his body begins to tingle, his sense of touch suddenly heightened. So it's highlighting the confinement of Jack's experience as something potentially erotic. Other stories countered these more realistic depictions with fantasy scenarios. There's many more in the paper, but I just want to share with you one of my personal favorites. Taking a breath, he knew his choice, a voluptuous alien creature from some distant planet with double female conjoined bodies in which he could experience, at least one time in his life, an out-of-this-world threesome experience. So as you probably expect, most of the stories involve Jack having some form of sexual encounter, and many of the stories emphasized how realistic the experience was for Jack. He finds that the experience is much more real and intense with the headset, feeling so much better than before. Eventually, he has an intense orgasm, much stronger than anything he has ever experienced watching porn and using his hand. Sometimes this experience was likened to sexual worship, whilst other stories heavily featured non-tangible aspects of the encounter. For example, the space between them was static, the air was thick with lust and the tension of their gaze. And we found it was fairly common for stories to feature these intangible, embodied sensations. Some stories had an emphasis on other non-visual aspects as well, such as touch, taste, and smell. She lifts herself to her hands and knees, crawling the length of his body to press her mouth against his. She's deliciously warm, and his tongue writhes with her, tasting her. So Jack here, and in many of the stories, is constructed as the active, desired male in this encounter. Thus, the perfect porn experience is created. Often, this also involved other subtle personal touches, such as characters calling each other by name. "What is your name?" he asks. "I'm Helen, a most appropriate name for the most perfect woman he's ever seen, and I'm yours." The moment Helen uttered the word yours, Jack knew he was in love and would do whatever it took to spend as much time as possible with her. She was his, and he could do to her everything he had ever dreamed. So a strong gendered discourse here, the woman the object of desire, and Jack the protagonist able to do apparently anything he wanted. But what this quote indicates is the more treacherous, precarious narrative, which is our second theme, which was also present in some of the stories, something that was almost too good. In considering this figurative line between virtual and real reality, sometimes this virtual experience was constructed as something dangerously close to a real reality. Sometimes the experience is so good it starts to take over Jack's life. Over the following weeks, Jack finds himself using the headset every time he watches porn. This increases over the months so that he is using it every day, and even to the point where he was thinking about it at work, looking forward to getting home. Yet while some stories emphasized how amazing and incredible the experience was, almost to the point of danger, when this experience isn't incredible and life-changing, it is simultaneously precarious in delivering a second-rate reality. After all, they're just Tixel pits, man. At other times, this precarious experience was presented as something more sinister. A small larva is inserted into his ear, which eats away through his brain out of his tear duct, causing weeks of excruciating pain and permanent brain damage. So with the potential of a perfect VR experience that I discussed earlier, this encounter is also opened up for potential corruption. For example, it took a moment for Jack to process this as he struggled for a moment of clarity in his lustful haze. She is a he. Jack went flaccid. So homosexuality, or the unexpected presence of a penis, often took on a corruptive role in Jack's experience. And although we had 15 non-heterosexual participants, only 2 stories featured Jack having an erotic homosexual experience, some of which were rather interesting. This story goes on. "We're going to have fun tonight," she said, and proceeded to fuck him super hard, and Jack got a boner again, and it was an unforgettable night, and Jack turned gay. The end. I'm glad you laughed at that. Other ways this experience was constructed as something potentially dangerous was through the potential to get caught. Wearing earphones and with the sound turned up loud to fully appreciate the moans of the girls he is playing with, he doesn't notice his flatmates entering the room unannounced. They are initially shocked, then amused. They take out their smartphones and snap away. Jack has become an internet sensation. Jack doesn't like this. Jack will never engage in virtual reality porn again. When a romantic partner discovers Jack, as you can imagine, this becomes even more problematic. Although interestingly, on 2 occasions in the stories, the VR headset becomes the savior of Jack's relationship. He decides to talk it through with his wife, which he does. The discussion brings them closer. After a few glasses of wine together, they decide to try the virtual reality together. Haha, what fun. They have a laugh and go to bed, happy, turned on, and feeling very close. Fun, happy, amazing sex follows. But of course, when these stories end happily, the VR headset becomes integrated in a happy, monogamous, heterosexual relationship. Several years later, Jack and Sarah still enjoy using the headset, but it is one part of their sex life, and they have a happy and healthy life together. But more often, reflecting the social stigma around masturbation, Jack's engagement with VR pornography just can't be excused. Maggie, Jack's girlfriend, had come over for a visit only to find him with a virtual reality headset on and his dick in his hand. A mixture of yelling and pleading of pathetic explanation ensues as she slams the door behind her. Therefore, many of the stories highlight this social stigma around the apparent use of virtual reality pornography. Jack realizes that this is a waste of time. He removes his headset and shuts down his computer. He decides to go out into the world and try to meet real people. He climbs into the driver's seat of his Toyota Celica and heads towards the local library. So, before I discuss the findings, I do want to bring this back to virtual reality a little bit, seeing as we're in a virtual reality session. Virtual reality occupies a curious space in the social construction of technology. We're in a position where the VR revolution is always just around the corner. If only we get rid of cyber sickness, then we'll have our VR revolution. If only we get rid of the cables on the Oculus Rift, then we'll have our VR revolution. And of course, we had many of these same arguments in the early 1990s with both Sega and Nintendo's attempts of VR proving commercial failures. So this time, is it different? Well, the jury is out, and we will find out in time. But one thing we do know is that the porn industry is getting behind virtual reality in a big way. And since the porn industry has been the driver of many technological revolutions in the past, perhaps, as this Mashable article states, virtual reality porn is now here. Will it be the perfect ideologized experience? Will it be a precarious experience on the cusp of danger? Or will it be seen as a mere second-rate reality? There is no way of preempting what this will be, but I want to argue that the use of the story completion method does make us consider some of these issues. The porn industry has been defined by some feminist scholars as an intrinsically problematic medium, naturalizing images of women as passive sexual objects, and the porn industry has been involved with the systematic abuse and mutilation of women. I want to emphasize that this is not all pornography. Things like the DIY porn movement is a totally separate issue to this. But I do align myself with a particular feminist perspective on the porn industry, which has historically been built around the concept of men possessing women. And we saw many of these problematic discourses reproduced in the stories, women being objectified, Jack, the protagonist, the active, desiring male. But what I want to argue is that if we are at the cusp of this VR revolution, we could be at a point of redefining VR pornography in a way that needn't simply reproduce these problematic ideals in traditional pornography. In some of the stories, we saw challenges to these more problematic discourses, with embodiment emphasized and a focus on sensory elements, touch, taste, smell. And as the VR experts in the room will tell you, the VR industry is looking in to develop these more sensory experience, and this could be a helpful challenge to these problematic discourses of pornography. And in the paper, we put forward a case for erotic design in VR and also reflect on some of the possible ethical dimensions. Yes, and we elaborate that on the paper, refer to the paper, of course. But I just want to spend the last 30 seconds or so reflecting on our use of the story completion task. This is a lightweight, economical method of exploring speculative future uses of technology, especially on topics where individuals may be less willing to engage face-to-face. And hopefully, as you've seen, the story completion method often takes us in unexpected directions, but we want to argue that it's these creative and surprising ideas that provide us with some of the most interesting insights around the social construction of new and emerging technologies. I'd like to say thanks to my co-authors, also Victoria Clark at the University of the West of England and the Story Completion Research Group, and would love to hear any questions or comments. Thank you.
I'm a little embarrassed to be asking a question in this one, but anyway, it's Victoria Bellotti from Park. It seems like you knew who these people were. I mean, you knew their age and their gender when they were writing the stories. I mean, do you think that there's two questions here? One is, do you think people are really revealing what they would actually really want to have happen in one of these environments? I'd imagine people would feel a little awkward. There's probably some people who had a lot of repressed ideas that they would actually visit in VR but are not saying. And the other thing is, it seemed a little weird to me to have just the Jack as the basis for males and females telling the story. And I would have thought, it might want to switch it around a little.
Great, thanks for that, Victoria. Yes, so your first question was around whether these stories reveal something true about our participants' psyches. And as a social constructionist, I don't think that. So we talk about the story completion, the history of the story completion method in the paper. It's been used in a Freudian way, so this is revealing people's innermost desires. But as a social constructionist, I don't think there is such thing as an inner psyche. What I'm interested in is the cultural resources people draw upon as they write these stories. So that's what I mean by a social constructionist reading of the data. Your second question was around, remind me? Yes, so this is a limitation of the study, which we acknowledge in the paper. A future gendered analysis would be very well placed. The reason we chose a male character is because we were aligning ourselves with the traditional view of pornography, which is an industry that is for male sexual pleasure. At the exploitation of women. So we weren't actually looking to problematize that concept in this research, but a gendered analysis of a female protagonist and a male protagonist would be well placed in the future. And many story completion studies do that. So analyze the differences when you change the gender of a protagonist, for instance.
Okay, thank you, Matt.
Thank you.
That was a great talk.